Hey everyone, and welcome to Jasim Graphs. Today, we're diving into something that shapes almost every single moment of our lives, usually without us even noticing it. We're talking about law, that invisible rulebook we all live by. So let's get right into it. Okay, let me start with a question for you. Picture this. It is 3 o'clock in the morning. The streets are completely empty, not a single car or person in sight, and you pull up to a bright red light. Do you stop? Yeah, most of us do. But why? Seriously, there's nobody there to catch you.
And you know the answer to that seemingly simple question? It's actually incredibly deep. It gets right to the very heart of what law is, why it even exists, and why we, as humans living in a society, actually choose to follow it. It's about so much more than just avoiding a ticket.
So, to really get to the bottom of our red light question, we've got to start with the basics. We use the word law all the time, right? But what does it actually mean?
At its most basic level, law is a system of rules that institutions, like governments, create to regulate how we all behave. But listen, the key word there, the one you really need to hang on to, is system.
Because see, law isn't just some big, random list of do this and don't do that. Thinkers like the famous legal philosopher H.L.A. Hart argued that for a legal system to actually function, it needs two totally different layers of rules.
So on one side, you've got your primary rules. These are the everyday do's and don'ts that we all know, like don't steal. Simple enough. But then on the other side, you have the secondary rules. These are basically the rules about the rules. They're the instructions for how we create, change, and even enforce those primary rules. Without them, the whole system would just fall apart.
Okay, so law is a system. That makes sense. But where do all these rules even come from in the first place? Well, for the most part, laws flow from three main places. First, you've got legislation. This is the top-down lawmaking done by governments. Then there's something called judicial precedent, which is where judges' decisions in past court cases actually set the rules for the future. And finally, you have customs. This is kind of a living law that just bubbles up organically from the shared traditions of a community.
All right, so we've got this complex system with rules coming at us from all different directions. But what's it all for? I mean, why do we even need it?
This is where it gets really interesting, because law actually plays this fascinating dual role in our society. Its number one job is to create social order. It gives us a stable, predictable framework so we can all live together without chaos. But it's not just about keeping things the same. Its second and equally crucial job is to drive social change. Law can be an incredibly powerful tool to fight injustice and help society adapt to completely new challenges.
You know, there's this fantastic quote from an Indian justice, P.N. Bhagwati, that just nails this idea. He says it's up to judges to infuse blood into a structure of legislation, turning what's just static text on a page into a living, breathing thing that can actually meet the needs of a real, evolving society. I mean, how cool is that?
And that brings us to maybe one of the toughest but most fascinating questions about law. What happens when it bumps up against our own personal sense of right and wrong? You know, our conscience.
Just think about it for a second. Can a law, one that's been properly passed and is enforced, still be just flat out wrong, unjust, immoral?
Well, there's a whole school of thought called legal positivism that says absolutely yes. It argues that a law's validity has nothing to do with whether it's good or bad. A law is valid if it comes from the right authority, like a government, and goes through the proper process. Whether we think it's fair, well, that's a totally separate question.
And listen, this isn't just some stuffy academic debate. It gets real. Take the true story behind a famous case, Queen versus Dudley and Stevens. 4 sailors were stranded in a lifeboat, literally starving to death. To survive, 2 of them killed the weakest one and ate him. Now, the law was crystal clear. Murder is illegal. But was what they did immoral, considering they were facing certain death? It's a truly haunting example of how our moral compass can clash, and clash violently with the letter of the law.
Okay, so with all that in mind, let's circle all the way back to that red light at 3 a.m. We know what law is now, but that still doesn't quite explain why we obey it when nobody is watching. Well, it turns out there's some science to it.
A really fascinating study in Nature Human Behavior actually put this to the test. They gave people a financial incentive, basically money, to break a rule in a completely anonymous setting. And get this, even with the reward, a whopping 55 to 70% of them still chose to follow the rule.
So the researchers came up with this really cool framework to explain why.
They call it the CRISP framework. It says our decision to follow a rule is a mix of things. You've got incentives, like punishments or rewards. You've got our own personal preferences, like just not wanting to hurt people. But then there are two other really powerful drivers, an intrinsic respect for the rule itself and our beliefs about social expectations.
But here's the real kicker. The study found that the biggest drivers of all weren't the punishments. They were our own internal respect for the rule's legitimacy and our desire to meet social expectations. We stop at that red light not just because we're scared of a ticket, but because deep down we believe in the rule, and we believe that everyone else in our society expects us to follow it too. It's an internalized sense of duty.
You know, the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau said it perfectly centuries ago. He said that laws are simply registers of our wills. In the end, law isn't just something forced on us from above. It's a reflection of the agreements, the values, and the expectations we've all built together as a society.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If our laws are truly a reflection of our collective will, then what do the laws in our society today really say about who we are and what we truly value?
All right, that's our look at the law. If this explainer helped you see the rules all around us a little bit differently, do me a favor and hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe to Jasim Graphs for more deep dives. Thanks so much for watching.